The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
September 3rd, 1965, cloaked the rural fringes of Exeter, New Hampshire, in a humid, moonless shroud. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine, resin, and damp moss. The night settling over the woods along Route 150 with a stillness that pressed against the chest. Norman Muscarello, an 18-year-old hitchhiker with a wiry frame and restless eyes, trudged the gravel shoulder toward home in town, his sneakers crunching softly, the distant hum of crickets his only companion. It was 2 a.m., the sky a starless black, the wind whispering faintly through the towering pines that flanked the road. The wind shifted, gentle breeze turning sharp and frigid, whistling through the branches with a high, keening edge that prickled his scalp. The crickets silenced mid-chirp, the air thickening with a stench ozone and something sour, like burnt wires laced with rot that stung his nostrils. A low, resonant thrum-thrum pulsed from above, vibrating through the gravel into his bones, and the trees trembled, their shadows twisting as if alive. Norman froze, his breath fogging in the chill, as a light erupted over the woods red, pulsating, blinding rising from behind the pines near the Carl dining farm. He squinted, shielding his eyes, and saw it. A craft oval, 50 feet wide, its surface a dull, matte grey that swallowed the night, glowing with 5 red lights along its edge, flashing in sequence like a heartbeat. It hovered 100 feet up, tilting slowly, silent save for that thrum-thrum-rum, its bulk casting a shadow that darkened the road. The wind howled now, a shrieking wail that bent the pines and sent a flurry of needles raining down, and Norman's pulse raced as the craft descended lower, closer settling 10 feet above a field beyond the trees. Jesus, he rasped, stumbling back, his sneakers slipping on gravel as a hatch slid open with a sharp hiss, spilling a bluish glow into the dark. Figures emerged, 3, maybe 4 small, 4 feet tall, their bodies shrouded in tight, glistening suits, floating inches above the ground. Their heads were oversized, featureless save for eyes huge, black, unblinking like oil slicks under the craft's light. Their arms moved stiffly, ending in hands that clicked softly. Tick-tick, a mechanical rhythm that echoed through the woods. Norman bolted, his heart hammering, but the light pinned him, a cold beam sweeping the road. Numbing his legs, slowing his steps, he dove behind a stone wall near the farm, his breath ragged, peering over the edge as the figures glided closer, their tick-tick-tick quickening, a chorus of menace in the dark. The stench surged sulfur now, a wave of decay that buckled his stomach, and the thrum-thrum grew louder, shaking the ground, rattling pebbles against the wall. One figure stopped, its head tilting, its eyes locking on him, those endless, black voids, and a voice hissed in his mind, "You are here." He gasped, clutching his ears, blood trickling from his nose as the sound erupted, a high-pitched whir-whir, like a saw cutting through bone, piercing his skull. The craft tilted, its red lights flaring brighter, and a mist sprayed from its underside, grey, oily, warm, coating the field, the wall, his skin. It burned where it touched, a stinging heat that seeped into his flesh, and he choked on the taste metal and rot, a poison in the air. The figures advanced, their bodies swaying, their eyes unblinking, and one raised a claw-like hand, a glowing rod pulsing green at its tip. Headlights cut the darker Jean Bertrand, a patrolman in his cruiser, screeched to a halt 50 yards away, drawn by Norman's earlier plea at a gas station. "What's going on?" he shouted, stepping out, his flashlight trembling as it caught the craft. The figures, the mist, the whirr was spiked, the figures. Turning in unison, their eyes flaring red, and the beams swung toward Bertrand, cold, unyielding, freezing him mid-step. "Get down," Norman yelled, but the wind roared her. Banshee's cry that shattered Bertrand's windshield, and the craft lurched, its lights pulsing faster, a heartbeat gone wild. Another car roared up Officer David Hunt, back up from Exeter PD, his siren wailing as he skidded beside Bertrand. The craft tilted sharply, the figures gliding back inside, their tick-tick-tick fading as the hatch sealed with a clack. The red lights flared once, twice, then the craft streaked upward, a grey blur piercing the sky, vanishing over Kensington with a final thrum-thrum that rippled the earth. The wind died, leaving a silence so deep it crushed their ears. Broken only by the faint whir were lingering in the pines, a ghost in the dark. Norman staggered to the road, his skin blistered, his nose still bleeding, collapsing against Bertrand's cruiser as Hunt radioed in. Something up there, big, lights, moving fast. The field bore Scarsgrass flattened in a 50-foot circle, warm to the touch, a grey residue clinging to the stalks, defying the frost. Bertrand's cruiser wouldn't start for 10 minutes, its battery drained, its radio spitting static fragments of that hiss, that voice. Hunt's flashlight flickered, dying as he swept the woods, catching fleeting shadows' eyes, winking out among the trees. Nearby, the Dinings' horses screamed in their barn, kicking stalls. Their manes streaked with that oily mist. Mrs. Dining, roused by the noise, glimpsed the craft from her window, red lights pulsing, a shape hovering before it vanished, her sleep plagued by that tick-ticked for weeks. A farmer a mile off, Ralph Toland, saw it, two lights weaving over his silo, silent and swift, the air heavy with that stench till dawn. They reported it at Exeter PD by 3 a.m, Norman trembling, Bertrand pale, Hunt steady but shaken, 3 witnesses in terror, their clothes reeking of sulphur, their skin clammy with fierce sweat. The Air Force swept in from PSAF, cordoned the site, took samples, called it stars and planets. But the residue, the burns, the horses defied their shrug. Blue Book stamped it unidentified, a rare crack in their skepticism, as locals whispered of radar blips that night, lost in Pentagon files. Norman never hitchhiked again, his hair grayed early, his sleep a loop of those eyes, that voice, dying in 03, swearing it was real. Bertrand retired, his hands unsteady, muttering about things that don't belong till 85. Hunt stayed quiet, but his logs noted the thrum-thrum haunting quiet shifts. The woods grew silent, no crickets, no owls, farmers avoiding that stretch, where the wind wailed and a faint whir, heard by hunters miles off, a pulse in the dark. The Goblins of Kelly, August 21st, 1955, cloaked the rural outskirts of Kelly, a speck of a farming community in Christian County, Kentucky, in a sweltering, oppressive dusk. The air hung thick with the scent of tobacco fields and damp earth, the night buzzing with cicadas and the croak of frogs from a nearby creek. The Sutton farmhouse, a weathered, single-story shack with peeling paint and a tin roof, stood alone amid the cornrows, its windows glowing faintly from kerosene lamps. Inside, 11 souls gathered. Elmer Lucky Sutton, 25, a wiry carnival worker, his wife, Vera. Billy Ray Taylor, 21, Lucky's friend from Pennsylvania. Glennie Langford, the matriarch, at 50, and 7 others, siblings, spouses, Kids crowded around a supper of cornbread and beans. At 7 p.m., Billy Ray stepped outside to fetch water from the well, his boots crunching on gravel, the heat clinging to his skin. The wind shifted a warm breeze, turning cold and sharp, whistling through the corn with a high, keening edge that silenced the cicadas mid. He froze, bucket in hand, as a light streaked overhead, multicolored, shimmering like oil on water, arcing low over the trees before vanishing into a gully a quarter-mile away with a muted thud. The air thickened with a stench sulfur and burnt metal, a whiff of rot that stung his nostrils. A low thrum-thrum-thrum pulsed from the ground, rattling the well's chain. Something crashed. Billy Ray shouted, sprinting back inside, his voice trembling as he burst through the door. Lucky laughed it off, Meteor, Prawley, but Glennie's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her coffee mug. The wind howled louder, a shrieking wail that bent the trees and rattled the tin roof, carrying a faint tick-tick-like claws tapping glass from the dark beyond. The dog, a mangy hound named Buck, growled low, then whimpered, bolting under the porch as the thrum-thrum grew, a heartbeat in the night. At 8 p.m., a shadow flickered past the kitchen window, quick, jerky motion that made Vera gasp. Lucky grabbed his .22 rifle, Billy Ray his 20-gauge shotgun, and they stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under their weight. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, catching something 30 feet away near the corn, a figure 3 feet tall, its skin a slick, silvery grey, glowing faintly under the stars. Its head was oversized, bald, with ears like bat wings, and its eyes huge, round, glowing yellow-orange burned like twin lanterns in the dark. Its arms hung long, ending in webbed, clawed hands that clicked softly. TIK-TIK-TIK. It floated an inch above the ground, swaying, its legs thin and useless, a nightmare given form. Sweet Jesus. Billy Ray croaked, his shotgun trembling as the creature tilted its head, its eyes unblinking, locking onto them. The wind screamed a banshee's cry that shook the house, and the sulfur stench surged, a wave of decay that buckled their knees. Lucky fired, the .2 to cracking the silence. The bullet striking its chest with a ping-like hitting tin, yet it didn't flinch, gliding backward into the shadows. Another appeared at the window, now its claws scraping the glass with a slow, deliberate scree, its glowing eyes peering inside as Glennie shrieked, shoving the kids under the table. The wind screamed a banshee's cry that shook the house, and the sulfur stench surged, a wave of decay that buckled their knees. Lucky fired, the .22 cracking the silence. The bullet striking its chest with a ping-like hitting tin, yet it didn't flinch, gliding backward into the shadows. Another appeared at the window, now its claws scraping the glass with a slow, deliberate scree, its glowing eyes peering inside as Glennie shrieked, shoving the kids under the table. The wind screamed a banshee's cry that shook the house, and the sulfur stench surged, a wave of decay that buckled their knees. Lucky fired, the .22 cracking the silence. The bullet striking its chest with a ping-like hitting tin, yet it didn't flinch, gliding backward into the shadows. Another appeared at the window, now its claws scraping the glass with a slow, deliberate screery, its glowing eyes peering inside as Glennie shrieked, shoving the kids under the table. The siege stretched past midnight towers of terror under flickering lamps. The creatures clambered onto the roof, their claws scratching tin with a relentless scritchy-scritch, dropping to peer through windows, their glowing eyes pressing against the glass. Lucky shot again, hitting one square in the face. It flipped backward, floating mid-air, then skittered away, unhurt, its hiss echoing in the wind's wail. Bullets ricocheted off them, metal on metal, leaving no blood, no wounds, only that sulfur stench growing thicker, coating their throats like ash. Glennie clutched her Bible, praying aloud, her voice drowned by the whir high, mechanical whine that erupted each time one lunged closer, claws snapping at the door, the walls, the air itself. "They want in," Billy Ray yelled, reloading as a claw smashed through a screen, its webbed fingers wriggling inches from Vera's arm. The kids wailed, the adults fired shot after shot driving them back, but they returned, relentless, their eyes glowing brighter, their tick-tick-tick a taunt in the dark. At 3 a.m., the wind spiked her, roaring tempest that shook the house to its bones and the creatures retreated, gliding into the corn, their eyes winking out one by one. The thrum-thrum-frum faded, leaving a silence so deep it crushed their ears, broken only by their ragged breaths and Buck's whimpers. Dawn crept in, grey and heavy, revealing claw marks gouged into the wood, bullet casings strewn across the porch, and a lingering stench that clung to the air days later. They fled to the Hopkinsville police at 3:30 a.m., 11 witnesses, trembling, their clothes reeking of sulfur, their skin clammy with fierce sweat. Sheriff Russell Greenwell found them ejured. Lucky's steady recounting, Billy Ray's broken sobs, Glennie's whispered prayers too raw for a hoax. The farmhouse bore scars gouges, shattered glass, a warm patch in the gully where something had landed, its soil baked hard, radiating heat. A grey film coated the tin roof, defying analysis. And the wind there wailed Anna faint whir-whir, were heard by neighbours miles off. The Suttons never slept easy again. Lucky turned hard, drinking to forget, dying in 69, haunted by those eyes. Billy Ray vanished last, seen in 62, muttering about goblins stalking him. Glennie aged overnight, her hair white, her Bible worn thin, whispering till her end in 78. They weren't from here. The kids grew silent, plagued by night terrors, some claiming the tick-tick-tick followed them years later. Why, Kelly? Locals spoke of skykin roused by human noise, the carnival's hum, the Poseids flaring that we call a curse on the land's deep roots. The army swept and cordoned the site, took samples, said nothing files buried in Blue Book as unexplained. The Kelly goblins left a Wounder family broken. A town marked, its wind a dirge, its shadows alive with claws that never stilled. The Shadows of Flatwoods, September 12, 1952, cloaked the rolling hills of Braxton County, West Virginia, in a suffocating twilight haze. The air hung heavy with the damp scent of pine and coal dust. The night settling over Flatwoods, a tiny farming hamlet, where the hum of crickets and the rustle of cornfields were the only sounds piercing. The stillness at 7:15 p.m., 3 boys said May 13, Freddie May, 11, and Tommy Hire, 10 played in a field near the schoolhouse. Their laughter echoing faintly under a sky streaked with the last embers of sunset. A light blazed overhead, a searing, reddish-orange orb streaking from the west, arcing low over the hills with a sound like thunder cracking through glass. It crashed a mile away on the Bailey Fisher farm, a muted thud shaking the ground, followed by a hiss that lingered in the air like steam escaping a broken pipe. The wind turned cold, a sharp whistle slicing through the trees, bending branches inward as if the forest itself recoiled. The crickets silenced mid-chirp, the air thickening with a stench sulfur, acrid and choking, like brimstone rising from a pit. "We gotta see it," Eddie shouted, his voice trembling with excitement, masking fear, as the boys bolted toward the glow, their sneakers pounding the dirt path. Kathleen, May, Eddie's mother, a wiry 32-year-old with a nonsense grit, joined them, grabbing a flashlight, her collie, Rusty, barking at her heels. 2 others tagged along: Jean Lemon, a 17-year-old National Guardsman, and Neil Nunley, 14, drawn by the crash's echo and the boys' shouts. The group climbed the hill, the wind wailing now, a banshee's cry that carried fragments of sound-distant moans, a low thrum 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 pulsing from the earth. At the crest, they froze. A red glow pulsed through the trees, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters across the undergrowth. The flashlight beam caught Ittercraft, 10 feet wide, half buried in the soil, its surface a dull, rusted metal, hissing faintly with white vapor curling from its edges. The sulfur stench burned their lungs, their eyes watering as the thrum-thrum grew louder, rattling their bones. "It's a plane," Kathleen whispered, but Jean shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No wings, no sound. That ain't no plane." A rustle snapped their attention. Left something moved in the mist. 50 feet away, its silhouette looming against the glow. The flashlight swung, and they saw it. A figure 10 feet tall. Its body a bulbous, armored mass, floating inches above the ground. Its head was round, encased in a hood-like shell, with 2 glowing eyes huge, yellow, unblinking set, in a face that wasn't a face, more a void with light pouring out. Its arms hung long, ending in claw-like stubs that clicked softly. TIK-TIK-TIK. A skirt of metal flared from its waist, shimmering faintly green, and the air around it shimmered to a heat-like distortion bending the trees behind. Rusty snarled, then whimpered, bolting back down the hill as the creature glided closer. Its tick-tick-ticked quickening, a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. The sulfur stench surged a wave of rot and acid that buckled their knees, their throats gagging on the taste. "Run," Jean yelled, but Kathleen's flashlight caught its eyes, those burning, unblinking orbs, and a sound erupted, a high-pitched whir-whir-whir, like a saw-cutting bone, piercing their skulls. Eddie screamed, clutching his ears, blood trickling from his nose as the noise clawed inside him. The creature tilted its head, its gaze sweeping them, and a voice not heard but felt hissed in their minds. "You trespass." The ground pulsed, the thrum-thrum spiking, and a red mist sprayed from its base oily, warm, coating their skin as they stumbled back. Jean tripped, his flashlight shattering, plunging them into near darkness, save for the craft's glow and those Ice-Doe's relentless, searing eyes. The wind shrieked louder, a storm of sound and stench, as the figure advanced, its claws snapping with intent. They ran blind, breathless, the hill a blur of thorns and mud. The whirlwhir were chasing them, the sulfur burning their lungs. Kathleen fell, her ankle twisting, but Tommy dragged her up, his sobs drowned by the wind's wail. The creature stopped at the hill's edge, its eyes flaring, then glided back to the craft, vanishing into the mist as the red glow dimmed. The thrum-thrum-thrum faded, leaving a silence so absolute it crushed their ears, broken only by their ragged gasps and Rusty's distant howls. They staggered to the May house, collapsing as Sheriff Robert Carr arrived, his deputies pale at their tail-six witnesses, in terror, their clothes stained with that oily mist, their skin blistered where it touched. The crash site, checked at dawn, bore a scar 15 feet wide, scorched black, the soil warm and reeking of sulfur days later. A grey residue clung to the trees, defying analysis, and the wind there wailed and a faint tick-tick-tick heard by hunters miles off. The group never recovered. Kathleen's hair greyed overnight, her sleep plagued by those eyes, dying in '69 whispering of the thing. Jean chain-smoked, his hands trembling, institutionalized by 60, muttering about judgment. The boys grew silently with migraines, Freddie with night terrors, Tommy vanishing in 75, last seen near that hill. The army swept and cordoned the site, took samples, said nothing locals, whispering of men in black silencing talk. Wife Upwood's old tales spoke of sky watchers roused by fire or human greed, the coal mines nearby, the Poseids blazing that week had they called it down. The Flatwoods monster left a wounded town marked, its wind a dirge, its shadows alive with eyes that never blinked. The Triangular Terror of Illinois. January 5, 2000, draped the sleepy towns of Highland, Lebanon, and Shiloh in southern Illinois with a frigid, starless gloom. The air hung heavy with the scent of frostbitten fields and coal smoke, the night settling over the flatlands like a shroud. At 4 a.m., the world was still cows, silent in their barns. The hum of Highway 50 reduced to a distant murmur, the wind whispering softly through the skeletal oaks lining the back roads. Patrolman David Carter, a 38-year-old cop with a steady gaze and a thermos of black coffee, cruised his beat near Highland, his radio crackling faintly with static, the only sound piercing the void. The wind shifted a gentle breeze turning sharp and icy, whistling through the trees with a high, keening edge that prickled his skin. The static spiked, a garbled screech erupting from the radio before it died, plunging the cruiser into silence. A low, resonant thrum-thrum pulsed from above, vibrating through the steering wheel into his bones, and the dashboard lights flickered, dimming to a sickly yellow. "What the hell?" Carter muttered, easing off the gas, his breath fogging the windshield as he squinted into the dark. A shadow loomed overhead, a massive triangle, blacker than the night, its edges sharp and unforgiving, stretching 200 feet across. It hovered 500 feet above the fields, silent save for that thrum-thrum. Its underside dotted with 3 amber lights, glowing like embers in a dying fire, pulsing rhythmically as if alive. The air thickened with a stench ozone, and something rancid, like burnt rubber, laced with decayed, that seeped through the cruiser's vents, stinging his eyes. The wind howled now, a shrieking wail that bent the oaks and sent a flurry of dead leaves swirling across the road, blotting out the stars. Carter fumbled for his radio, his voice trembling. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12, I've got something in the sky. Big, triangular." No sound, static, swallowed his words, the mic hot in his hand, and the cruiser's engine coughed, then died, its headlights winking out. He stumbled out, boots crunching on gravel, the thrum-thrum louder now, rattling his teeth. As the triangle drifted closer, slow, deliberate, a predator sizing its prey. The amber lights flared, casting a sickly glow that twisted the shadows into claws reaching across the field. Across the county, others saw it. In Lebanon, Clara Hensley, a 60-year-old widow, stood at her kitchen window, her hands frozen mid-wash over a sink of dishes. The triangle loomed over her backyard, its bulk blotting out the horizon. The amber lights pulsing in sync with a faint tick-tick-tick like claws tapping glass that echoed through her walls. The air grew heavy, her chest tightening as the stench hit a wave of rot that buckled her knees. Her dishes clattering to the floor. "It's watching me," she whispered, her rosary slipping from her fingers. As the lights flared red, then dimmed, the triangle sliding north without a whisper. In Shiloh, trucker Mike Brody slammed his brakes on Route 106, his rig shuddering as the triangle crossed his path, low enough to skim the treetops. His CB radio screeched a voice, garbled, not human, hissing through the static. "You see." The thrum-thrum shook his cab, the windshield frosting despite the heater's blast. and a grey mist seeped from the object, toily warm, coating his rig as it passed. "Ain't no plane, ain't no chopper," he stammered into his log later, his hands trembling, the mist leaving a residue that burned his fingertips raw. Carter grabbed his flashlight, its beam trembling as he aimed it upward. The triangle's underside gleamed a smooth, matte black, etched with faint, spiraling lines that pulsed with the lights, as if breathing. It tilted, revealing a fourth light white, blinding, emerging from its center, sweeping the field like an eye. The beam locked on him, cold and unyielding, and a sound erupted, a high-pitched whir-whir, like a turbine spinning through flesh, piercing his skull. His nose bled, his ears rang, and a voice not heard but felt slithered into his mind. "You are known." He staggered back, the beam releasing him as the triangle shifted, drifting west toward Shiloh, slow and silent, a shadow swallowing the night. Carter radioed again, dispatch, patched him to Lebanon PD, then Shiloh, a chain of voices confirming the same terror. "It's huge, no noise, it's moving." 4 departments tracked it: Highland to Lebanon, Lebanon to Shiloh, Shiloh to Millstadt. Over 20 witnesses, cops and civilians alike. Their stories in dread. In Millstadt, Officer Craig Stevens snapped Polaroids from his cruiser, the triangle hovering over a barn, its lights flaring red before it streaked upward faster than sound. A black dart piercing the sky, vanishing into the void with a final thrum-thrum that rippled the earth. The wind died, leaving a silence so deep it crushed the air, broken only by the faint tick-tick-tick lingering in the trees, a mechanical echo fading into the dark. Carter slumped against his cruiser, his flashlight dead, his nose still dripping blood, the stench clinging to his uniform like a curse. The field bore no mark, no scorch, no tracks, but the grass lay flat, warm to the touch, and a grey dust coated his hood, defying the frost, its heat searing his skin when he brushed it off. The night left scars. Carter's cruiser wouldn't start for hours, its battery drained, its radio spitting static days later, fragments of that hiss, that voice. Clara's kitchen window frosted over, unmelting till spring, her sleep plagued by those lights, her hands blistered where the mist had touched. Brody quit trucking, his rig scrapped after mechanics found its engine corroded, a grey film eating the metal. Over a dozen witnesses, cops, farmers, a nurse reported the same. The triangle, the silence, the stench, the dread of being seen. The Air Force shrugged. Scott, AFB, 20 miles away, claimed no flights, their logs blank, their jets grounded. Locals whispered of Cold War tests gone wrong, radar pulses from the base waking something ancient, or a meteor shower that weak Poseids again drawing eyes from beyond. The soil near Shiloh stayed warm, a faint thrum-thrum pulsing underfoot on quiet nights, heard by hunters miles off. Carter retired early, his hair graying, his dreams a loop of that beam, that voice, dying in 15, swearing it was real. Clara moved, Brody drank, the town's hushed, marked by a shadow that knew their names. The Illinois Triangle, baffled, all radarless, soundless, its size and speed mocking 2000s tech. Blue Book long closed, no files explained it. Skeptics cried hoax or stealth craft, but the mist, the burns, the terror defied their math. In 2025, the fields remain a silent witness, their wind a wail, their dark alive with eyes that never blink, waiting for the next to see.